My first Star Wars memory, I remember playing with toys that were my older brothers before knowing anything about what Star Wars was.
So my first Star Wars memory was actually seeing Phantom Menace in theaters.
My first memory is like laying back on the floor and like watching Star Wars, and just like my uncle was like a huge fan, so he would always explain stuff to me. My mom was a huge fan, so like they were all nerds around me and they would explain stuff.
I fondly remember like sitting there and watching them with my family whenever they would come. My cousins would come for the holidays.
So my parents had the box set on VHS, and they sat me down when I was probably 6 years old, and they're like, hey, check out this, it's really cool. And I was like, whoa, these guys have cool blasters. I don't know what that laser sword thing is, but it's amazing.
I used to wake up every morning when I was about 5 years old, and I would rush to the VCR while my parents were still sleeping, and I would pop in Return of the Jedi, the VHS tape, and I wore that tape down.
But I honestly think I saw the Battle for Endor and Caravan of Courage. Like I saw those on, probably like the Disney Channel, just being vaguely aware of like, I think this is Star Wars.
Like we used the Star Wars VHS tape until it was like you couldn't watch it anymore.
The tapes were way too worn out. So those are my earliest memories of Star Wars, just watching those tapes.
When A New Hope first came out in movie theaters, my parents took me as a baby, and that was before it was even A New Hope. But I was there, and I've seen every Star Wars movie in the theater.
I grew up in Orlando, Florida, so my first Star Wars memory was actually going on the ride.
When The Phantom Menace came out, I was in 8th grade, and I was in the marching band, and I played Star Wars.
That opening chord of John Williams' score, it always just gives me chills.
My first Star Wars memory is the cantina from the original Star Wars, and being pretty terrified of the severed arm coming off.
But the first memory I thought that really stuck with me was my mom actually introduced me to the original trilogy.
Watching Star Wars with my grandpa, he bought the VHS set.
It's weirdly not just an isolated movie experience. It's a lot of it that I think for me and a lot of other people is how moments you shared with other people.
My personal favorite of just like enjoyment, and I know it's like a really controversial opinion, is Attack of the Clones.
I actually really like The Phantom Menace.
It's a toss-up between Episode 3 and Episode 7 for me.
It sounds cliche, but The Empire Strikes Back is still my top favorite.
Return of the Jedi. That's my favorite. If it's on, I watch.
I'm a big fan of the spin-offs, Solo, Rogue One.
Tie between Star Wars, The Last Jedi, and The Empire Strikes Back.
Revenge of the Sith was I felt like it did its job.
I'm a new Star Wars fan, I guess. I didn't grow up on Star Wars, so I'm gonna say The Force Awakens. I really like that movie. I know everyone's gonna kill me for it.
There's just something special about the first Star Wars.
My favorite character by far would have to be Kylo Ren.
Mace Windu?
Probably Luke.
Tie between Han Solo and Wicket the Ewok.
My favorite character, hands down, in Star Wars films is Qui-Gon Jinn.
It's probably Yoda.
Emperor Palpatine, Darth Sidious is one of my favorite characters of all time.
I'm really gonna say Rey from the new trilogy.
Leia's my favorite.
It's gotta be Han.
It's Luke Skywalker.
It's my guy. One of my favorite Star Wars characters of all time.
I got a chance, Scooby.
You've never heard of the Millennium Falcon?
Should I have?
It's the ship that made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs. I've outrun Imperial starships. Not the local bulk cruisers, mind you. I'm talking about the big Corellian ships now. She's fast enough for you, old man.
I love you. I know.
Do or do not. There is no try.
This one's got a bad motivator.
Hey, you guys stay here. Chewie and I will take care of them. It's like, quietly, there could be more out there. Like, hey, it's me.
No, it can't be. That's not possible.
When it comes to Star Wars A New Hope, you have to give it respect because it's the original movie. And when I was a kid, it wasn't my favorite.
The first Star Wars has it all. It has the adventure, it has the drama, it has the excitement.
And as you get older, you realize that the movie itself changed the game as far as storytelling in Hollywood at that point. The special effects, the techniques they used to film it, everything about it was just a game changer. And George Lucas was a visionary that really pulled off something super risky, and it has paid off in spades.
It was the first real blockbuster. Yeah, Jaws was in there, but this was the first one that said, no, we can take something like a schlocky sci-fi space opera and make it the most epic thing that you've ever seen put to film?
First time I saw New Hope was when I was way younger, probably 7, 8 years old. My parents bought me the original VHS trilogy set, so it was all 3 of them together.
A New Hope is fine. I know it's the movie that started it all, but when you look at everything else that we've gotten, it's fine.
I remember I was at my sister's apartment. I was like, oh, Star Wars. I remember Star Wars, and I had the toys. Like, what is this? And I just remember sitting on cable, commercial breaks and all, just being fascinated by all the desert stuff at the beginning with Luke Skywalker and Ben Kenobi and the Jawas and everything. And I was just hooked from them.
I remember seeing it like at my grandmother's house at one point. Just like I saw parts of the movie, and I asked what it was because I had no idea. And I remember my dad telling me, "Oh, this is Star Wars. Like, you know, those movies you like. These are the old ones that came before it."
I kind of feel like, you know, A New Hope is that perfect Star Wars dosage. It's that perfect Star Wars movie, and pretty much everything that's come afterwards has been them trying to recapture the magic of that movie to varying degrees of success.
My favorite part of A New Hope would probably have to be at the end, where the showdown between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan.
Kind of see Darth Vader for the first time, and everything about Princess Leia, that conversations that they have with one another.
My favorite part in Star Wars A New Hope is when they first arrive on the Death Star and they rescue Princess Leia, and everything about the trash compactor scene just really like filled me with dread as a kid.
I think when Luke is standing there looking at the 2 sons of Tatooine setting, there's not a word. Not a word is said, but John Williams' score says everything about what that guy is feeling at that time.
I'm a big fan of George Lucas, so I don't have a problem with him going back to edit these films to how he sees fit. I mean, I feel like all this started from vision and idea in his head. If he sees fit that he thinks putting a younger Anakin Skywalker in a movie fits the story better, by all means, go do it.
Don't fix something that's not broken. It was great the way that it was. There's just no need to add extra stuff. We don't need it. We don't need a rock in front of R2-D2 to show that he's hiding. We knew he was hiding.
The problem with them is now we only have the special editions. In the 80s, Ted Turner started colorizing movies, and George Lucas was the big proponent against not doing that. And he said, if you do that, eventually those are the only copies of these films we're going to have, and the originals are going to be lost, which is exactly what happened with his movies.
There were things, it was kind of a mixed bag. It was great to see, you know, the spaceships and the laser effects improved and all of that. That was very great practical use of kind of CGI effects. George Lucas doing things like adding a full Jabba in there was disconcerting because it was just intrusive to my memories of what it had been.
Oh yeah, I hate how you can tell the difference between what was added after the fact and what's original, because so much of it was practical back then. As soon as you see something in CGI in the new movies, it just really takes you out of it.
Can you imagine if Leonardo da Vinci looked at the Mona Lisa 20 years later and was like, I don't like her smile. I think I'd like to add a mustache. That's how the special editions feel.
None of it looked good. None of it was justified. The stupid Han shoot first thing.
We all kind of agree that Han shot first.
Han shot first. Han would never let anyone get the jump on him.
Oh, Han shot first. And why they changed that, I'll never understand. That's a fundamental part of who Han Solo is.
Oh, Han, for sure. He's an outlaw. He's a smuggler. He's not going to have any moral qualms about, icing some bounty hunter.
Oh, Greedo. Always. Oh, wait, hold on. No. Oh, no, I said that wrong. No, Han shot first. See, this is what George Lucas wanted.
Han. Yes, Han shot first.
Han. Because the character journey of Han just seems like he needs to shoot first. He needs to be that rogue smuggler guy, and then to learn, to care for other people and maybe ask questions before frying Greedo.
Who cares? The same result happens.
I love that in the Disney Plus edition. They did it yet again because they were like, we're just going to change it. Except this time, Greedo's like, McClunky. And it's like, why?
No one needed McClunky, but it exists.
Why? Why George Lucas? Why?
There's so much personality infused in every little aspect of the movie. It feels like a Western in this big dusty planet. It feels like a fantastical epic because you've got guys wielding swords and wizards and dark magic and all this other things. And then at the same time, it's just a really fun, enjoyable ride that if you're 10, you love it, and if you're 50, you love it.
We're losing a deflector shield. Both strap yourselves in. I'm gonna make a jump to light speed.
The Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars movie because it had a tall order to fill coming back from that original Star Wars, and that success, having to be a sequel to that, could have been just a huge mess and was a very hard thing to pull off, and they did. I'd consider it one of the best sequels of all time because it really delved into the development of each and every character.
Hits all of its beats. It gives us everything we need for character development and just epic scenes of combat and story development. I mean, it kind of hits everything. It's kind of the perfect movie, honestly.
I think it's the best of the Skywalker saga, hands down.
The movie almost literally descends into darkness. The film starts with this crisp white planet, this, pure as snow planet, and just gets darker and darker and darker as it goes on.
That movie is dark, and it was always my least favorite growing up because I wasn't to that point in my life where I could understand the darkness of it. But now, being older, I realized you have to have that depressing middle trilogy that sets up, the big redeeming factor at the end of the films.
Starts off in one of the most iconic planets in the franchise, in Hoth, and everything that surrounds that battle is just shows you how monumentally epic Star Wars can be.
I remember definitely thinking it was more interesting, mainly because I have a personal love of the planet Hoth, and I was like, there's ice everywhere. There's these little camel things. Oh God, Luke is going inside of a camel thing.
The great Tauntaun massacre of The Empire Strikes Back. That whole entire scene, because I was a big monster movie kid, and so when the Wampa comes in and just completely obliterates the Tauntaun, and that whole scene plays out.
Because that was like heart-wrenching to me since the first time I saw it was a kid, and I was like in love with the Tauntauns. So I was like, I want one as a pet. And then they gut it, and I like legitimately was crying.
I don't like The Empire Strikes Back. To me, that one is boring. I don't, the entire time on Hoth, I just don't care about. And it takes up so much of that movie.
Between the fun and the silliness of like Yoda training Luke, like there is still that lightheartedness. You get to see Han and Leia's relationship evolve, which is great. It's one of the best relationships on screen in science fiction. You get the introduction of Lando, like a man who is not bad, but he does some bad things, and he's clearly very compromised.
I remember this distinctly because I taped everything when I was a kid. And I ran out of tape for Empire Strikes Back right before they put Han Solo in Carbonite. So I had this memory of it happening and how dark that ending was, and our characters fleeing Cloud City with Luke Skywalker missing a hand, Han Solo in Carbonite, the rebellion looking like it's in real trouble. I just remembered that sentiment, but every time I watched it, all I saw was him kiss Leia, get up there, and the smoke start, and him go down, and then the tape would cut. And so that was a very dark place to end on in my memory for many years.
When Han Solo and Leia are looking at each other and they have that iconic exchange, and she says, I love you, he says, I know. And then the music swells to this crescendo as they kiss, and then Han gets lowered into the carbonite. Like that moment and that music at that moment just really hits you right in the heart.
I love just that very slow battle between Darth Vader and Luke, because it's less about the grandiose nature of the Jedi, where they're doing flips, kicks, things like that, and it's more about a hunter stalking his prey. Because if you look at it, Luke is just completely terrified. He's just that young kid. He's kind of learning how to use the Force, kind of learning how to use a lightsaber. He does not know what's going on. And Darth Vader's just playing with him.
All of the crazy flips and stuff they do in the prequel trilogy, as kind of spectacular as they are, they never managed to top those visuals of just those lightsabers in the dark going at each other, that kind of classic sword fighting in that scene.
Before I knew anything about Star Wars or anything, I knew the line, Luke,
I am your father.
No, I am your father.
It's like one of those fairy tales that you don't know how you know, but you know pretty much all your life.
You were just like, oh man, this guy isn't just facing this evil emperor that he's supposed to be scared of. He's facing his father, and how kind of powerful that was did sink in to me.
And it's just such a heartbreaking moment. And Mark Hamill's performance really sells just how desperate Luke is in that moment, and how there's no way out. He's done.
I think every property that ever existed has done Luke, I am your father at some point.
If you choose the quick and easy path, as Vader did, you will become an agent of evil. Patience.
And sacrifice Han and Leia.
If you honor what they fight for, yes.
Return of the Jedi has a special place in my heart just because I saw it as a child, and that was my favorite movie as a child.
After seeing something like Empire, you get to Return of the Jedi, you don't know what to expect.
That's the movie that sits the best with me over time, because my sister and I would just watch it over and over and over, and for me, loving just monsters and creatures on screen, it was like heaven for me.
Everything from the returning to Tatooine and meeting Jabba and seeing all those crazy creatures in his palace, and the fight with the Rancor, and then when Luke finally gets his lightsaber.
I think Return of the Jedi is the most fun. Everything about Return of the Jedi to me is perfect for kids, except for Boba Fett dying. That's some bull.
Return of the Jedi felt after Empire like a return to the high adventure idea. That stuff with Jabba when they're on the Sand Sea and they're fighting on the ship and all of that. It's like crazy pirates in the desert with lightsabers, and that stuff is my kind of deal.
I think it's Lucas pulling back a little bit on just how dark he was going with Empire. Like, Empire goes to some dark places and it ends on a really sour note. And Jedi goes, hey, let's lighten things up a little bit.
It's good. We get the face-off with the lightsabers. We get Darth Vader kind of redeeming himself. We get the happily ever after with Leia and Han Solo. It's just kind of wraps it all up with a pretty little bow.
To this day, the bike speeder race in the forest is like one of the greatest action sequences I've seen. It's the thing that made me aware of sound design in movies, because the sound design of that scene is just so on point and important to them kind of achieving this effect.
My favorite part of Return of the Jedi is the Battle of Endor, and like 3 stories playing out at the same time, and just how well edited that is. And you don't know how it's going to end. Is the duel with Vader and Luke going to end before they blow up the Death Star? Are they going to blow up the shield generator before they get to the middle of the Death Star? Like, which of those 3 threads is going to finish up first, and how they tie up together at the end is pretty cool.
It was cool to see Darth Vader just redeem himself at the end of the movie. I wasn't expecting his redemption arc to be like it was. It was cool to, I guess, actually see Luke and Anakin kind of connect with each other, because throughout the series, throughout the movies, it's been Luke and Darth Vader, and he really hasn't had that connection with his father.
He looks at how he's similar. He looks at his machine hand and his father's machine body, and he realizes that there is still human inside both of them. And he decides to appeal to that side of his father by standing up to the Emperor and basically doing what his father could never do. And it's that moment that it turns Darth Vader around, that shows him, there is still good in me. I still have love for my son, my family, and I'm going to finally do the right thing.
And then all of a sudden, Darth Vader's like, and we're going to kill this bad guy. Like, it just came out of nowhere. Like, I remember I was awake at that point. The first time I saw this kid, I just started cheering, because I was like, yes, I hate that guy.
You're figuratively battling for the soul of Anakin Skywalker. So you do have that darkness, and then for the darkness, there's the light, there's the Ewoks.
I mean, I love Ewoks. I feel like Ewoks have gotten a lot of flack in the Star Wars universe, but I mean, they were there for people like me as a kid. I just everything Ewok.
I still have a lot of love for Ewoks. I mean, yes, they are kind of a cutesy gimmick that were introduced to Star Wars, but Star Wars is now full of cutesy gimmicks. As I say, we're not screaming for Baby Yoda to go away.
I am a fan of the Ewoks. I am proud to admit I am a fan of the Ewoks. Like I said, I think this goes back to me being a fan as a child, but once it's in you, you know, you can't just all of a sudden realize that, oh wait, Ewoks are stupid.
I like that, you know, they don't really communicate. I like the noises and little spears. And I love the fact that they're like the ones that save the day at the end. Like, it's not just, oh, hey, here's a cute creature. It's, here's a cute creature that actually serves a purpose to the plot because they actually come in and they like help turn the tide. Like, I love all that stuff. And they have little spears.
Ewoks. I feel like I have a controversial opinion about Ewoks because while I do think they are adorable and cute, I hate like the weird noise they make.
I am not a big Ewoks fan. I feel like I saw it when I should have been. Like I was of the right age to be like, ah, sweet. They don't bother me.
They get a lot of hate. And I also know that there is a like subsection of fans that like of Star Wars fans. I'm not saying all. It's a subsection that hates anything remotely aimed at the mainstream. Like, don't corrupt my precious sci-fi thing. However, that stuff I always love. And that stuff just targets me.
Chewie! Get down here! She's wounded! No, wait! I got an idea.
The Phantom Menace was an insanely different experience because you had no idea what to expect. You grew up on these movies and you knew there was never going to be another one, and then they surprise you and say, well, we're going to go back in time and show you how everything began. And the anticipation that I felt before that movie came out was intense, you know? Like, it was like a kid on Christmas morning the day it finally came out. You couldn't go to sleep because you knew tomorrow you were going to see the first new Star Wars movie in 30 years.
I saw Phantom Menace opening night, and then I saw it 3 more times, 3 consecutive days, because I loved it so much. Pod racing, baby.
I can't think of any movie since then that has had such a strong promotional hoopla around it. I have not seen a marketing campaign like that.
I had never seen something so big and so tech heavy and with so many crazy creatures and, you know, awesome designs and things like pod racing and Darth Maul. Like, I'd never seen stuff like that, and it blew my mind. I mean, just wow at the time, right? The Naboo starfighter stuff, the Jedis actually fighting, like Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan were just cool as shit at the time.
When the Phantom Menace tickets went on sale, me and my friends pulled this elaborate, we had a school that you could not leave, like no skipping, you don't leave for lunch, none of that. We pulled this elaborate thing to get somebody in line all day and switch out all day so that one of us was out of school saying we had to go to an appointment or something, and would spend a few hours in line at the local movie theater. Somebody would swap out in that place, and we did this whole thing because we wanted those tickets.
All I have to say about The Phantom Menace is high expectations. The prequel begins. I feel like there's no winning here. How are you ever going to live up to the original 3 movies?
A decade and a half after Jedi, here's the franchise coming back. It needs to be great, and it was just okay.
I remember going to see the movie, and I didn't come out saying like that was an utter waste of time or anything like that. I remember having fun. And I also remember looking at it like it could have been something better because like all the parts were there.
I mean, I really enjoyed the trilogies. Like, I remember that's a special memory for me watching them with my grandpa. And then I went and watched The Phantom Menace, and it just kind of obliterated that. It was just terrible. It was so bad.
With The Phantom Menace, I actually, got to see this in theaters this time versus, seeing episode 4, 5, and 6 on VHS first, and was sorely disappointed.
I saw it at 3 a.m. at Man Chinese Theater because I thought that was the most iconic place to see Star Wars. It's the most exciting movie presentation I've ever seen. Like, every line, people were like cheering their heads off. Jar Jar stuff happened, everybody's like, I'm just gonna let this slide and just keep watching this. It had amazing lightsaber stuff. It was exciting. I went and slept for like an hour or 2, got up, went to see it again. I saw it in the theater 6 times. So years later, I remember I was driving in my car. It's just random. It was years after the prequels came out. And suddenly, I just thought to myself, those movies aren't very good.
I have never been more excited for a movie event in my life. Then I saw The Phantom Menace. But before you think I was all let down, no. See, I was in too much denial, so I watched The Phantom Menace another 8 times.
I was a kid, so I do remember, like, I really thought it was interesting, like, Anakin was, like, a kid, and he was, like, the main hero of this, and me not knowing anything about Luke, I was like, oh, this is awesome. It's a kid's movie.
Now this is pod racing.
A lot of it's politics. We start off with a trade dispute. I'm 10. I don't know what's going on.
I was a little confused, a little bewildered, because it definitely was not the same as the original movies, but it still felt like mine. It was still something for a new generation.
That checked all the boxes for me when I was a kid, and like watching Duel of the Fates when I was a kid was insane.
I mean, The Phantom Menace has so many cool things going for it. Like, just from a total world building standpoint, this is all stuff that you never thought you would get from Star Wars that was boom right there in front of you. Like, it was a ton of new stuff. Sure, there was a lot of talk about trade and politics and whatever, but I didn't care. It was pod racing.
I feel like Lucas had this idea about this. The Republic's on the decline, and, the Jedi have lost their way. They're running errands for the government. And all of that, you can't keep up with it because there's this Jar Jar Binks doing slapstick comedy in the middle of it, trying to tell you that this is a cartoon.
If I have to be pro or anti, I'm probably pro Jar Jar.
I'm pro Naboo, but I'm not pro Jar Jar.
I love Jar Jar. It's another thing. It's another one of those, I was young, so Jar Jar wasn't bad when I was growing up. Jar Jar was funny to me for whatever reason. He reminded me of like one of my cousins.
Jar Jar was not meant for me.
You know, I find that Jar Jar creature to be a little odd.
Kind of a heightened version of Chewbacca or C-3PO put together.
So I feel like a lot of my, like, passionate defense for Jar Jar, like, goes back to the fact when I was a kid trying to get an entry point to this franchise, Jar Jar was a really helpful figure.
I really liked Jar Jar. Like, he was actually one of the one of the best parts of the movie for me.
I can see why people don't like Jar Jar. I don't care. I mean, Jar Jar's fine.
Jar Jar, to me, growing up, was awesome. I loved Jar Jar because his lines were funny. I always thought that was hilarious. And now it's kind of like when you watch it, you kind of roll your eyes a little bit.
He ain't no Chewbacca, okay? But he's there, and I don't care.
Excuse me.
And the midichlorians is the poster child for taking a well-established fantastical lore and trying to explain it away into death.
I mean, it's kind of nice to see that corner of the mythology has mostly been dropped. With the sequel trilogy, they're not testing Rey's midichlorian count.
As a kid, I grew up learning that the Force was this mystical thing that only a few people had control over and were lucky enough to be able to use. They were gifts. And so the fact that they kind of added this scientific explanation to it.
We didn't need some detailed kind of biological reasoning for that.
The explanation that none of us ever asked for. It was like trying to explain that God is just science, I guess. I don't know. It was the worst.
Midichlorians are stupid. Like, I recognize that wholeheartedly. Midichlorians are a dumb thing.
I hear the opening notes to Duel of the Fates, and I just go, yes, give it to me.
That entire sequence with Duel of the Fates is, again, one of the best duels, one of the best fights in the entire saga.
Because it's such an acrobatic battle, and then knowing like the work that the stuntman behind Darth Maul, Ray Park, put into everything, just watching him do those flips and then having Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan just counter everything, and they look like they're perfectly in sync. It was kind of like a ballet of death.
Lolova Numatafa.
Fuibaniaga. Tolbedabakidanko.
Yippee!
I've never liked Attack of the Clones, ever. When I was going through my first time watching all the prequels, it was just a real low point for me.
I remember seeing it in theaters for the first time, and the spectacle of it is enough that you think, well, that was fun and that was cool. And then when you go back and watch it again, you realize it really wasn't.
I didn't like it back then, and I thought maybe I'd like it a little more when I got older. No, I haven't.
It feels like the most forgettable.
Attack of the Clones, I just don't remember. And I feel like it's not that I don't remember, it's that I've completely removed that from my memory bank.
I'd be hard pressed to tell you what even happens in Attack of the Clones.
Of all of the movies that I think back to, I watched Attack of the Clones one time and immediately made a vow to never watch it again.
I remember leaving that theater, and like some people say they had this feeling with Phantom Menace. I did not. I enjoyed it. When I left Attack of the Clones, I went, that was not a good movie.
It was probably my biggest letdown in Star Wars. Just the whole kind of weird thing with Anakin and Amidala, and then some of the battles, and then the ending climax with Yoda flipping around with the lightsaber, Natalie Portman falling out of a cruiser and then getting up like completely unscuffed and doing that funny run, like all that stuff. I was just like, what is this? But time has changed me, actually. I've recently gone back and watched Attack of the Clones, and I actually like it as one of the best movies because I think when you step back and look at the whole thing, you realize George Lucas was always kind of a funny, silly-ass storyteller. Like, the best part of the original trilogy really is the cheese that's sprayed all over it.
I was really disappointed in that film. I had such high hopes because I was like, okay, Anakin's a little bit older. He and Obi-Wan, they have a great relationship now. They're going to be like this unstoppable Jedi team where they can just, go through the galaxy righting all the wrongs. And then instead you just hear Anakin complaining about sand and making fruit fly across the room with his force powers.
What were you thinking, George Lucas? What are you doing in these moments? Like, they talk about, oh, we're in love so much, and then like, but we can't be in love the whole freaking movie. So make up your mind. Don't force feed us any more of that.
But I loved how campy it was. It was so cheesy. At the time, I just appreciated it at face value because it was just entertaining. Like, I just loved watching it. There was so much action. There was a Coliseum fight. Like, Padme and Anakin were like frolicking in fields together and like having weird love sexual eye gazes at one another, which I didn't understand at the time, but now I do. Very much a favorite of mine, as I would say, like personal enjoyment. I watched it just recently, and it only reconfirms that I'm right with my opinion.
None of this works. None of this writing works. Anakin and Padme, this has been gone over 1,000,000 times, but it's painful.
I suspend disbelief all the time. Like, obviously, Ewoks. Like, I suspend disbelief all the time. I cannot suspend disbelief that these people remotely love each other, like each other. Like, they just do not. I don't get it.
I don't know if George Lucas has ever seen a human relationship between people in love, but it is not whatever is happening in that movie.
I find it really weird that it eventually works. I'm still a little bothered by the fact that they end up together because he's a real creep for a long time, and Attack of the Clones is like peak creepiness from him.
But it really just seemed like the love story was the hardest nut for George Lucas to crack, and we watched those attempts unfold on screen.
If there's a good part to be found in that movie, it is the Coliseum scene.
Just seeing the arena fill up with green and blue lightsabers everywhere, and then they just attack, and it goes into all-out war. Everything about it was mind-blowing.
It's the closest I think the prequel trilogy comes to recapturing the magic of Han and Luke and Leia during their adventures.
And then there's that great moment where Padme and Anakin and Obi-Wan are all tied up, and Padme's able to get herself out, and Obi-Wan's making all sorts of snarky jokes about it. Like, that was a great moment.
Then you get to see Yoda fight. And I remember the movie theater at the time just completely gasped. And then once he pulls out his lightsaber, it erupted into cheers.
I think a lot of times people will rag on, oh, the acting was horrible, or the dialogue was horrible, or the story was da-da-da, whatever. But I give a lot of credit to the visual team.
Clones feels like Lucas hearing the criticism of Phantom and going, no, wait, please love me. Here's an entire army of Jedi. Here's a guy who looks like Boba Fett. You like Boba Fett, right? Well, here's another guy that looks just like him. Here's Natalie Portman's midriff. Please, here's some more lightsaber fights. We're gonna give you the Yoda fight that you've always wanted. Please, just love me again. Love this trilogy again. And it feels desperate.
It feels super frustrating to end with the tease of the Clone War. But, of course, we got the TV series. But still, at the time, it was like, oh, this is all we're getting. And then the next movie picks up. Meanwhile, at the end of the Clone Wars, here's what's going on.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
By the time I went and saw Revenge of the Sith, the reality of Attack of the Clones and the Phantom Menace as, at best, subpar movies had really set in. So I went in with some pretty low expectations. And that was the movie I remember seeing again with friends in theaters and thinking, oh, he finally figured out what he was trying to do with the prequels.
And this was a chapter we all wanted to see, where Anakin Skywalker makes the big transition into Darth Vader, one of the most pivotal moments in this entire saga. So I was hyped.
That was an awesome experience. Coming off of Attack of the Clones, I was a little worried. I was like, oh man, is George going to be able to land this plane? What's going to happen? But I was still excited because it's Star Wars. I love Star Wars.
Even though it was an improvement over the previous two, all the magic was gone. I feel like the mass amount of green screen and digitization and effects, and it was just, I feel like a lot of it was sort of sucked out of what made Star Wars so special to me, is all the practical effects.
Overall, I mean, it accomplishes its goal. It brings us to this transition point between the prequels and the original trilogy. And so, even though I think it's the one Star Wars movie I would remake if I could, and like remake again and make a lot darker and more powerful, I still love it for what it is.
The fact that Padme doesn't have anything to do in Revenge of the Sith really annoys me. And just seeing her misused that way, or like dying of a broken heart type thing, like at least give her an illness that we could believe,
Revenge of the Sith is a movie that has a ton of terrible lines, but great moments.
The dialogue in Revenge of the Sith was not my favorite. There's a lot of lines that I think are super funny, like when Anakin says,
Love won't save you, Padme. Only my new powers can do that.
Or when the Emperor says, unlimited power!
Yes, we got awful, lines, I mean, all over the place, but it's stylistically, I thought it looked the best. I thought it flowed the best. I love it.
We obviously have to talk about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, because that scene is it's so intimidating to be watching that, because this is like the seduction of Anakin Skywalker.
My favorite part of episode 3 is probably by far the Mustafar fight, and that's probably like my favorite moment in Star Wars, period.
The prequels absolutely destroy, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8 in choreography. The lightsaber fights, with Darth Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon, and then with Anakin and Obi-Wan, there's long cuts. It's not quick cuts.
The raw kind of acting and emotion there, especially from Obi-Wan at that point, I just feel like really helped sell Anakin's transformation and lean into the dark side.
I vividly remember seeing that opening weekend and convinced that this was the last time I was going to see a Star Wars movie in the theater. I was thoroughly convinced. I didn't think there would be any reason to believe there would be a sequel trilogy. And I just remember being in awe.
Actually, out of the prequels, this was definitely the best one. Specifically the third act of it, where we really get to see Anakin Skywalker make that turn.
The Darth Vader transformation, looking back, maybe not the high point of this movie. However, I am willing to look past that, knowing what I know now and knowing what I knew when I watched it, which was, he is going to be preserved, he's going to live on, and he's going to serve this greater purpose to make this huge moment for Luke in the future.
The big no at the end, I remember being in the theater and everybody being so you got the sense that people were like, wow, this is actually better than we expected, and everyone's into it, and then he shouts and the entire theater just bursts into laughter. It is so over the top. It's just, I don't know who, I feel like that's an example of nobody having the guts to pull George Lucas by the shoulders and say, no, this is too much.
Sure, just like everyone's valid in hating Jar Jar, it's valid to hate Darth Vader screaming, no!
Why? Just have them lay there.
People, I say I like the prequels, and I do, and I try to defend them, but that was probably one of the cheesiest moments in Star Wars.
Putting Darth Vader together is awesome. When you hear that those first breaths through the ventilator or whatever, like you're like, oh, here we are.
I'm never upset to see Vader on screen, but at the same time, I wish it were under better circumstances.
I think Revenge of the Sith could have been like the whole prequel trilogy, really. If you started with Anakin as an adult, you could have started with him as the swashbuckling hero, and his downfall could have played maybe a little bit slower if you want the whole trilogy to be about that, instead of starting off with Anakin as a 10-year-old kid.
And I think in the hands of better writers and better directors, that story could be a great singular movie. And Sith makes the great argument that you really only needed one movie to tell the story of Anakin Skywalker falling to the dark side.
Medically, she's completely healthy. For reasons we can't explain, we are losing her.
She's dying.
We don't know why. She has lost the will to live. We need to operate quickly if we are to save the babies.
I love everything about The Force Awakens. Like, I love all the characters, I love the settings, I think the movie itself is gorgeous.
Feel of it immediately felt like it recaptured the essence of Star Wars, but with modern technology. Like, everything looked real and practical, but also dated at the same time. So J.J. Abrams took 4, 5, and 6 aesthetics and applied them to Episode 7 immediately. And it didn't use the CGI that the 1, 2, and 3 was using, and I love that right out of the gate.
Every single seat is filled, people are dressed up, lightsabers are in the theater. As soon as the opening crawl hits and the music hits, there's just this roaring cheer in the theater.
Something was missing. I think it was the 20th Century Fox fanfare.
My mom, like I said earlier, took me to all the Star Wars movies. She sat me down and watched the originals. She took me to all the prequels. When 7 came out, I took her. But I was like, no, you got me into this. So we're going the rest of the way.
And Abrams did a great job of hitting those nostalgia points and delivering characters that you knew and in that familiar way. So every time someone would come out on screen for the first time, it was the whole audience lost their mind.
I felt like I was a kid again in theaters watching The Force Awakens. That's all I wanted. I wanted to be brought back, and it was a perfect way to take me back there and also introduce me to new characters.
Seeing all of this new generation of kids experience Star Wars and really just take to it, and in a more diverse way. I know some people think, oh, Star Wars, Disney made it social justice warrior, but I think sometimes we underestimate the importance of children who look a certain way or are of a certain gender, who don't have these stories from old generations of storytelling, getting the chance to really see themselves represented on screen like this, and what a profound effect that can have.
Everyone's expectations were riding high for these new Star Wars movies since Disney purchased Lucasfilm.
They had to prove to fans that, hey, we still got it. We can still make something good out of this. We're not gonna have some mopey teenager talk about how Sand is coarse and rough and gets everywhere.
They didn't seem to take too many risks, but everything they did worked to get the fans on board and say, well, we're back to Star Wars, this is really exciting, and we have the original cast and we have a new cast, and we like both of them a lot.
You go back to that well. You have to acknowledge what it means to people right now, here. And so I don't know if Star Wars could have come back any other way for all of the faults it had and all of the reasons that, I didn't particularly, it didn't stir anything within me. It still also had to sort of be that way, in my opinion.
It's been a long time since we had any type of Star Wars, so at that point I was just excited to have Star Wars movies come out.
And it was interesting to see how the movie paid a lot of credit to A New Hope in kind of retelling the same story beats, but The Force Awakens is not A New Hope. The Force Awakens is made with modern day movie making sensibilities, where it's basically a tour de force from beginning to end.
Yes, obviously the story beats are pretty similar, but also just the vibe and the directing style. It feels like old school Lucas.
For someone, J.J. Abrams to be able to capture that again and reignite that all the fan bases as one, that's a pretty impressive feat.
I think The Force Awakens had to be what it was because so many people were kind of disenchanted with the franchise with the prequels that I think you almost had to bring it back to home base and say, this is what Star Wars is and this is why we all loved it. And to try to follow that formula was probably the right call.
And I was just floored. It was able to kind of encapsulate all the things I loved about Star Wars with a fresh energy. There's a lot of callbacks to the original trilogy, but they were able to move things forward with so many interesting, unique characters: Kylo Ren, Rey, Finn.
Han and Leia meeting again. That's a pretty powerful moment.
Han delivering Chewie, we're home, there's a lot of weight behind that one delivery from Harrison Ford that we don't get a lot of nowadays. But when he wants to turn on the acting chops, he absolutely still can. And that little moment right there shows that.
You think that Finn is going to pick up that lightsaber and become the hero, then he gets cut down and the lightsaber goes flying and then it lands right in Rey's hand and she holds it and pops it. That made me feel the magic again.
And there's that moment when Rey uses the Force and pulls that lightsaber to her. I remember that moment giving me chills in the theaters.
People are counting on us. The galaxy is counting on us. Solo, we'll figure it out. We'll use the Force. That's not how the Force works. Oh, really? You're cold?
I think that The Last Jedi is one of the bravest kind of departures that Star Wars has ever tried to take. The way that Force Awakens is a very happy-go-lucky in a way, nostalgia machine. The Last Jedi wants to pull away from all of that.
I love that movie an immense amount. I think stylistically, it looks great. I love everything it does to kind of turn Star Wars on its head a little bit. And it's got action, man. It is a well-paced movie that is a ton of fun to watch.
Everyone had expectations after The Force Awakens when it comes to mysteries, like who was Rey's parents and who is this Supreme Leader Snoke guy. And that's not what Star Wars is about. Star Wars isn't about a mystery. Star Wars is about adventure. And to see how Rian Johnson took all those expectations and subverted them and made a compelling story that is basically about a hero failing, but always getting up to try and do the right thing, even if it takes him 20 years to do it. That was one of the most intriguing aspects of the movie.
It does subvert a lot of the setup of the previous film, which was really it was like a greatest hits compilation, and then you come out with a new album. And the new album is pretty different while also still being in the same mold as previous stuff. So you're looking at characters who we haven't seen in many years, who have been teased in this new installment, and then they show up and they're not how we expect them to be.
That is what Empire Strikes Back does for Star Wars, the original trilogy, and for better or worse, that's what The Last Jedi does for this sequel trilogy.
Fans don't like that. They want their Luke from Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. They didn't want old scarred man Luke who is rejecting these age-old things. But that's interesting, that's growth. But they don't want to see that. They want their Luke.
I was really excited to see Luke come back because Luke was my favorite. But then the fact that he didn't really do anything except force project himself was a bit of a letdown.
Luke Skywalker having this crisis of faith and going to isolation and being this kind of rattled older man who had been on this heroic mission is a challenging notion. It makes things uncomfortable for people about what life can be, what the kind of journey of life is like.
Yeah, Han was the same guy, but the problem was Han was the same guy after so many years, and Han hasn't changed at all. There's no character progression in Force Awakens. You can't say that for Leia or Luke.
I think that's crazy because people gave The Force Awakens, they gave it crap for being too much like A New Hope. And then you give The Last Jedi crap for being just way too different. So I'm like, what do we want,
If you got everything that you asked for, it wouldn't be a movie. These storytellers wouldn't be telling you their version of the Star Wars saga. And because of that, I think that that's led to a lot of disappointment. To be honest, I would much rather see these movies as they are, because there are filmmakers taking chances with these characters and doing something exciting with them that we've never seen before.
That got people mad because they had put so much of their own mental investment in who these characters were supposed to be and what their plans were and all that, that filmmakers never promised. They'd put it in their own heads.
And I still will say that I think making her parents nobody is a brilliant idea.
Feels like that was kind of the way that Rian Johnson was able to take a step back from not just the narrative beats of the franchise, but what the concept of Star Wars means to everyone. But I feel like it was just this dividing point of, are you here for what Star Wars means, or are you here specifically for, you know, the laser sword battles?
I went in with one hope, and it was that there was going to be a really cool lightsaber fight. And there was. And so I forgave everything else, and I left The Last Jedi being like, that was really cool. I really enjoyed it. And then I kind of processed, you know, Leia Force floating through space, and kind of how jarring Yoda looked reappearing. And so over time, it sat kind of rough for me.
I think the idea of what a Jedi is supposed to be got lost a little bit over the course of the prequels and through merchandising, and they became these kind of superhero action stars. But if you go back and look at the original trilogy, they're much more ascetic, they're religious, they're centered, it's about balance, it's not about heroism. And Luke really trying to drill that into Rey felt like, through Luke, Rian Johnson trying to remind fans of what Star Wars was when it started.
To me, Last Jedi is high on my list as the next, because I think it's a good movie. I think it does interesting things. It might not be the most enjoyable Star Wars movie that I'll just watch every night, but it's the one that I think does the most interesting stuff with the genre.
My favorite part of The Last Jedi is when Kylo and Luke are doing the battle, or the lightsaber duel on Crate. And there's that moment where you think Kylo cuts Luke in half, and there's that smear of red sand, and it looks like it's blood. To me, I will watch that scene over and over and over again.
When Holdo goes through, I think it's a cruiser, and the visual that comes on screen is gorgeous, but the sound is completely paused for right after it happens. And that moment when that sound hits on screen, and hearing that in a theater and knowing the sacrifice that just happened, it's an epic moment.
The throne room scene after Snoke gets murdered, where they're sitting fighting all his personal guard, and the fact that it truly capitalizes on the lethal nature of the lightsaber.
And then it takes a while to quite figure out what exactly the Canto Bite stuff is really meant to be, because instantly I thought that was useless. But you sort of figure out that it's kind of important to show that, you know, there's a side of the galaxy that's profiteering off of all of this war that's constantly going on. Because it's Star Wars. It's in the title.
Who do you think you're talking to? You presume to command my army? Our supreme leader is dead! We have no ruler!
The supreme leader is dead.
Long live the supreme leader.
I feel like Star Wars is about something different for everybody, because for me, a huge part of it is family and nostalgia. It is about watching these, you know, having my mom tell me to watch these movies and being able to connect with my older brother on these movies.
I think Star Wars is about hope and identity and individuality, but also about coming together.
So I think it's about taking the human condition and putting it in this fantastical environment, and then letting the audience still see the similarities in their own life.
The power of many individuals over the power of a a singular entity.
Star Wars is about hope. It's about family. It's about love. It's about adventure.
Star Wars is about good and evil. At the end of the day, it's the balance between good and evil. Good prevail will evil prevail. That's what the dark side of the Force and the light side of the Force are all about.
I think Star Wars is about having hope in yourself and having hope in other people, and finding that in the darkest circumstances.
I do think it's about the fights between good and evil and how the heroes can always come from unexpected places.
I personally think it is about conquering everything that's holding you down. If you look at all the different characters that have been in those movies, like Luke, Leia, Han, they all start from a lower tier life and they have struggles. Every single person, they went and they fought through, and obviously they had a little bit of luck, but they persevered.
Star Wars to me is an inevitable struggle between your inner nature and whether you're going to do the right thing or the wrong thing. And it goes to show you that no matter what happens, there's always hope for you. You can always choose to do the right thing. And I think that's probably the most inspiring message that Star Wars can deliver.
To me, Star Wars is about life, and I think that's what really makes it connect with people. There's so much in Star Wars that I believe that most people who watch it actually do bring into their real lives.
I think Star Wars, for me, is about finding and going towards a light and finding hope in a dark and murky world.
For me, it's more so an escape from the real world. It's an escape from stress or issues or problems. It's something I can just key into and just go to that world and be like, man, if this was real, I'd have a lot of fun.
Giving you the confidence, seeing yourself in these characters and learning that you can kind of do anything if you really do try to. And it might not happen for you right away, and you can easily be tempted to do the easier thing. But when it comes down to it, if you believe in yourself and you surround yourself with people who are willing to help you, you can accomplish pretty amazing things, and you can help the good outweigh the bad.